Disability has existed throughout all time. Disabled people, whether they had physical or mental disabilities, were treated in different ways according to what time in human history they lived, where they lived, and what social position they had, rich or poor, white or black, women or men. So living with differences was not always treated in a negative way or in the same way throughout human history. In ancient Egypt, Seneb, a little person, was also the head of the royal textile works under King Pepe II and supervisor of the pharaoh's wardrobe. He was married and had children. This man was well respected in ancient Egypt, held high office, and had a family. Experiences that have been denied to many disabled people in our contemporary culture. During the Middle Ages, mad people or people with mental health issues were both cared for by members of their communities as well as shipped off on boats. Some ships returned, others found new destinations, while some disappeared. Sending them away meant these individuals were no longer a burden on the community. The image on the screen is of a painting by Hieronymus Bosch, painted between 1490 and 1500. It is of a ship filled with mad people who are playing games, eating, making music, and swimming. Also during the Middle Ages, in farming communities, disabled people were part of and contributed to those communities. The quote, village idiot was also considered an acceptable social role, a unique individual who was dependent yet contributed to the social fabric of their community. However, many scholars believe that disability, as we know it, can be traced to the rise of factory work. People moved from the country and into the cities to do this work. Factory work required that people do the same task over and over again, often while standing. People worked very long hours and often in inaccessible spaces. For many disabled people and people who were sick or old, this meant that they could not contribute. These individuals were sent to warehouses to stay because there was now no place for them in the community. More and more people also became disabled during this time because the factories were very dangerous places. This image is of women working machines at the American Woolen Company in Boston in 1912, a little bit after the Industrial Revolution. Moving forward into the 20th century, in the 1960s and the 1970s, there was in the United States a number of social movements, civil rights, women's rights, gay rights movements. These movements helped to bring about the disability rights movement. Ed Roberts was seen as the father of the independent living movement in the United States. There are two images of Ed on the screen. As a young man with polio, Ed wanted to go to college and advocated for college dorms to have attendance to support his education. This was the beginning of the disability rights, independent living movement in the United States. The Berkeley Center for Independent Living was started by a group of students with disabilities at the University of California in 1972. The U.S. government refused to sign Section 504 of the Rehabilitation Act that would require any organization that received money from the government to be made accessible to disabled people. This included things like schools, airports, and libraries. Section 504 went unsigned for 4 years. In 1977, and frustrated by waiting, disabled people organized and decided to occupy government buildings all across the U.S., trying to force the government to sign Section 504. The longest protest took place in San Francisco. 120 to 150 disabled people occupied the federal building for 25 days. Medicine, food, and support were brought to these protesters from community members and other organizations like the Black Panthers and Vietnam veterans. These protests were led by Judith Heumann, who eventually became a member of President Barack Obama's administration. This is a great example of cross-movement efforts that included people from different backgrounds. Section 504 was finally signed on April 28, 1977, and this led the way for more rights for disabled people in the U.S. The image on the screen is of protesters gathered around a cluttered office desk during the sit-in of Section 504. The history of disability internationally and in the U.S. is very important foundational knowledge for understanding the Canadian disability movement. The Canadian disability rights movement is discussed in the next video. However, another key takeaway from learning about disability throughout history is seeing how it has changed. Disability has not always been the same. This means that how we understand disability today and how we treat disabled people today can also change. Disabled people's experiences in everyday life can become something else, can become something better.